Good morning, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Matt.
Hi, guys. There's a little bit of technical issues there. Nothing like that to stress you out on a day-to-day basis like that, But thank you very much, and I hope everybody's well. So today we're going to kick things off. Before we dive into this, I just want to take a second to kind of talk about why this is so important. The plan for neighbourhoods for me is probably one of the most important things that as regions and communities we focus on. And so the purpose of today is to really focus on and gain insight from what other areas local authorities have done that has worked, so that as a whole we can really seize this opportunity in this moment. So we're going to firstly introduce our speakers today. So I'll start first with Melanie.
Hi everyone, I'm Melanie Lamb. I'm the Service Manager for Regeneration at Wigan Council. I'm going to be talking about Lee. Thanks, Matt.
Excited to hear more about that. I'll go next to Danny.
Hi guys, hi Matt. My name is Danny Crump. I'm Director of Urbanism at Layer Studio. We're a landscape and urbanism practice, and we are supporting Melanie in Lee. We're also working in Rochdale, in Haywood, their town, Rosendale, Rawtenstall, St Helens in Newton the Willows, and there is another place, and it will come to me. So we've got some good experience, and I'm going to be chatting about understanding place through context mapping today.
It's really exciting. I mean, you must be so busy when you're there. There is more. I guarantee it.
One more.
Philip, over to you.
Hi everybody, my name is Phil Jones. I'm Director of New Services at the Calico Group, and I'm going to be talking to you today about community engagement in Burnley and the work we've done to make sure our communities feel part of the activity around long-term plans and the new programme around delivering plans for neighbourhoods. I'm
really excited to get into that with you. So, and before we get into that, the man that requires no introduction, Mr. Johnny Burkett, over to you.
Oh, thanks for that, Matt. Hi everyone. Really pleased to be here. I'm Johnny Burkett. I'm managing partner at Genicon. We've supported. I'm not going to go through the list. We've supported multiple people with long-term plans for towns and obviously plans for neighbourhoods. We work nationally, and in Genicon are economic development placemakers, and we think this programme's transformational. So really pleased to be here. Thanks, Matt.
And I guess that, the bit for me that's really exciting about this is actually about community engagement, and actually not doing development to communities, but engaging with them, so that actually the community is what the community wants and needs. Before we kick things off, we've got something called Mentimeter. And so at the end of the event, we're really keen to ensure that we create content that you actually want and that you need. There's going to be a QR code, and if you can scan that, you'll be able to vote as to what future content you want to be created. And I've not introduced myself. I've come on like a maniac because I was struggling to get on. So I've come on and I've still got my jumper on. Underneath this is a shirt, but I'm not going to derobe down in front of everybody. But my name's Matt Masters, and I am a huge advocate of local government. I run a podcast in my spare time, and I run a workshops on helping local authority officers achieve their potential. I'm also a recruiter, but I don't normally lead with that because the conversation normally dies. But let's start with some context for those that are on the call. The plan for neighbourhoods is a 1.5 billion pound investment, and it's all about community-led development and regeneration. It has 3 strategic objectives: thriving places, stronger communities, and taking back control, I should say. So we're going to discuss today really what's worked well in Burnley. And I'd actually like to start, if it's okay, Melanie, if we could start with yourself, because there's going to be questions today, guys. So if you want to, if you have a question, if you put it into the chat, I'll ask it at the relevant point. We're normally going to do it so that questions are at the end, but if you have something that's really pertinent and you want to ask it, just put it in there, and I'll ask the relevant speaker at that point. Melanie, I'll come to you first. Who's doing the PowerPoint? Have you got your own, or?
One of the Genicon team's kindly going to share my slides.
Whilst we're waiting for that, I guess what my first question to you, Melanie, would just be about why is this so important for you, and how has it affected your community in terms of what you've been doing there?
You're going to steal my thunder, Matt. It's a massively important funding opportunity for places, and I think the key element for me is, one, the long-term nature of it, and secondly, the community focus, and I'll come on to that on my final slide. So that segue is lovely in a beautiful way. So yeah, I introduced myself at the start. I'm Melanie Lamb, Service Manager for Regeneration at Wigan Council. I've been asked to talk a little bit about Lee. I'm going to give a little bit of context about Lee, and then I'll reflect on our experience of long-term plan for towns, and then have a bit of a look ahead as what holds in store for us with Plan for Neighbourhoods. So next slide, please, Jason. Okay, so for those of you that aren't familiar, Lee is part of Wigan Borough. It's the second largest town in the borough. That's the one, that's it. Wigan is one of the 10 Greater Manchester authorities, and Lee itself is about 13 miles west of Manchester city centre. It's got a very strong separate identity to Wigan. The town itself has some fantastic attributes, but like all of the places that are part of this, it's also got some significant challenges, and some of those are quite deep-rooted. It has some of the highest levels of deprivation in the borough. It's got particular concentrations of poor health, very high percentage of young people that are not in education, training or skills. And there's issues around antisocial behaviour and perceptions of crime, particularly around the core parts of the town centre, that's a real barrier. Connectivity is an issue for us in Lee. There's no train station. It's also not yet part of the Greater Manchester tram network, but it has got a very good bus network, and there's a picture on the right there of the guided bus service into Manchester. And there's a couple of pictures there of the canal and some of the fantastic countryside that's around the edge of Lee town centre. But access and connectivity to those is an issue, and the heart of the town centre doesn't have a lot of quality green space. So next slide, please, Jason. So here's a couple of images of Lee. The town centre itself is quite compact, the core area. You can see there that we've got some tight residential streets right on the edge of the town centre, and actually quite an affluent, wider catchment. But one of the challenges for us is that wider catchment's not really coming into the town centre. Lee's got just about every out-of-town retailer and supermarket that you could possibly imagine around the perimeter. So getting people to take that extra step into the town centres sometimes a real challenge. And events have been used as a key way to kind of try and drive footfall in that way. The town centre, you can see from some of the images, got some beautiful buildings, but it does suffer from underinvestment, and many of those buildings are vacant or poorly maintained, which affects people's perceptions of the town centre and its vibrancy. So when long-term plan for town was launched, Lee had an informal board of stakeholders that were interested in supporting a better future for the town centre, but they themselves didn't have any direct funding or remit. So next slide, please, Jason. So when we think about where we were roughly this time last year, when it was announced as an initiative, there was a real excitement and optimism, but there was concern around timescale, and I think that probably resonates with everybody that's been involved in the programme. It was a really short period to establish a board and produce a plan with meaningful consultation with the wider community. Building relationships within the board was really important to us. Not everybody on the board knew each other, and some of them hadn't been involved in a board structure of that nature before. So it was a challenge to get everybody familiar with what was an absolutely new regime in terms of the initiative, and also comfortable about what their remit was as part of the board. And what worked well for us were the more informal sessions that we run with input from the Genicon team and the wider consultancy teams. Things like the walking tours and the Christmas tea and cakes session, giving people an opportunity to talk freely about what their concerns were and how they could shape the future of the place. It was also really successful where boards were using their own contacts to reach out amongst the community, so their own social media channels. And we were really fortunate to have Lee Leopards Rugby Club push out the consultation, which really boosted our levels of engagement across the wider community. Linked to time frame, that was a really short period to get meaningful engagement. So the way that we tackled it was to have quite an intensive period across the June and July, lots of drop-in sessions across the town centre, pushing out the surveys as much as we can with internal contacts. And it was really successful response rate of 1,500 responses for something that nature and that time frame. That provided us with a really sound evidence base, not without its gaps, but a good basis to move the plan forward. I think another challenge that we experienced was the fact that the board and the community moved with such pace, particularly from April to July. When the initiative was paused partway through July, there was a real stunt in momentum. So we had a draft plan, but it wasn't finalised, and the board decided to hold it in abeyance until we had some clarity on the overall position. And then there was a long period of time, as you all know about, waiting for confirmation of the programme, and then for the new guidance to come out in the new year. So it's been difficult to keep momentum and keep clear messaging amongst the community. And I think we're positive now that we're in a position that we can start to do that with partners and stakeholders, and rebuild some of the confidence that gap and the pause in the initiative has allowed to creep in a little bit. And my last slide, please, Jason. So first, looking ahead, Plan for Neighbourhoods is really exciting opportunity for Lee. And I think we haven't seen a fundamental change in the guidance in our reading of it. I think what it does to its benefit is try and give places as much flexibility as possible to think with their communities about what the real challenges are in their specific places, and then identify the tools to address them. So I do think it gives as much flexibility as it possibly can to places. There's an opportunity with the new guidance and the direction for places to strengthen their boards. And we're expecting a focus on addressing gaps in the engagement that we know that we had earlier in the summer, because we had to move so quickly last year. So in particular around young people. And we've established a youth board as a step towards that. It's getting meaningful engagement from younger people around the town centre needs different mechanisms and different approaches. So that's starting to work well. But we do think challenges will remain. And I think one that emerged during long-term plan for towns process was around the capital revenue split. The types of initiatives that people are talking about that they want to see and that will impact them, a huge proportion of them are revenue. And also a lot of the activity that we expect would normally happen first is revenue. And there wasn't a change between that 75-25 split between capital and revenue that I think we'd certainly hoped and lobbied for change on that. I think another challenge for us will be managing expectation, because we've had that pause. We were getting everybody excited about it this time last year. How would you spend £20 million in Lee? And then there's been a bit of an abeyance as the new guidance and the regime has come in. But there's a massive opportunity for us. So we're looking forward to, over the next few months, being able to get people excited again about change in their town centre, raising awareness about the fund. And for us, it fits in very well with the council's corporate approach about working collaboratively with communities through progress with unity. So we're looking forward to it having a long-term meaningful impact in the town. So happy to answer any questions, Matt, if that's at the end. Or
yeah, I think, look, I mean, it's a really interesting piece there, and I think you've done an amazing piece of work there with Lee. I mean, just now, before we go on to our next slide, I would be really just curious to understand, Melanie, how have you maintained that relationship? Because you've had the stop-start and it's been kind of an ebb and a flow, and you've had some really tight turnarounds. How have you maintained the relationships with the key stakeholders to really drive this through?
It's been a challenge. So we have I think good foundations with the initial relationships with the board, and they've built their own contacts within that. So as the accountable body in the secretariat, it's the council's role really to sit behind and facilitate. So we try and do that fairly quietly without enforcing ourselves very loudly on process in the background. And we are expecting some flux and some change, as I say, as we're looking at the board themselves, looking around the table and seeing, well, how do we make sure we're fully representative of the wider community, and do we need to expand memberships of the board to do that? But I think it comes down to having open conversations with the board and enabling them to be open with the public. So we did, and we had to say that when the initiative was paused, that we didn't know what was going to happen, and there was no point pretending that you do. So I think being open and transparent about that, and then being able to fill the messages in a gradual way is how we've had to proceed.
And I guess the other bit on this point around, communication, Johnny does some amazing topics that we've covered on the podcast around engaging with community groups. But I would like actually your advice, Melanie, for those that are on this on this webinar session. That community engagement, how do you engage with a community group that is so diverse, both in age, different backgrounds, belief systems? How do you engage in a meaningful way to capture the data so that what you create is truly representative of what the community as a whole is looking for?
Well, there are probably people on this call that have more experience in engagement than I do, but from my experience, and it's something that everyone will probably have a slightly different answer to, it is, I think you have to understand how people want to be engaged and how best they can contribute, rather than having a set formula and a way to engage with every different group. So I think it's about designing the consultation approach by understanding who your stakeholders are and how they want to be engaged. And one of the problems with the initiative that all places will have found last time was, because it was a matter of weeks to enable that proper engagement, there wasn't the time and there wasn't the capacity to do that. In particular, I would say with small grassroots community organisations that are already very time-starved and very resource-starved. So having a bit more luxury of time to engage on their terms is going to be really valuable, and it will only add to the quality and depth of the product and what we were able to achieve across all of these towns.
Amazing. Well, Melanie, thank you very much for going first. And I apologise for saying the wrong council. I said Burnley and I went to say Wigan, so thank you for that. Let's go now to Philip Jones. Jason, would you mind loading the slides, please? So again, Philip, whilst I was waiting for the slides to load, what was the biggest challenge that you overcame?
Well, I think Melanie's just nailed it, to be honest with you, the timescales. So I'm going to talk a lot in my presentation about community engagement and how you take communities with you. Having a matter of weeks to pull the information together and do it in a meaningful way was perhaps the most significant challenge. So yeah, that would be my answer. And again, a beautiful segue into my presentation, Matt.
Seamless. There we go.
So yeah, as I said, we've done introductions, so I don't need to go through that. Probably one thing I did want to pick up before I get into the substance of my presentation is the key theme that I'll be talking about, which is about collaboration and the importance of bringing together partners and organisations and stakeholders to get things done. So whilst I have the absolute pleasure of presenting this work on behalf of Burnley, I wanted to just acknowledge that it is representative of a broad range of organisations that all pulled in the same direction to achieve what we needed to achieve. If I could have the next slide, please, Jason. So I'm going to start off by talking about the challenge that was laid out in front of us and a couple of perspectives on that. So the challenge from government was is there for you to see on the slide. How we translated that, I think, is really important. And the second, the translation isn't a perspective of negative. It probably picks up on why I think community engagement is key and how sometimes we can misread or misrepresent that. So as professionals, when we got the announcement, we were all very, very pleased. £20 million coming into Burnley, the things we could do with that, the opportunities it would present to us in terms of the continuation of transformation of key parts of our towns. But from a community point of view, Melanie made this point as well. It was really important to remember that there are really high levels of vulnerability in our community, the social disadvantage that we see, and social exclusion as well. There are huge chunks of our community in Burnley that often feel not present within the work that we do. So it was absolutely key for us to overcome that. We didn't want to leave a kind of residual suspicion within the community about what we were up to. We wanted to make sure that every corner that would see the benefit of the investment had the opportunity to talk about what that investment would do and what it could achieve. What was really important to us is not just the focus on consultation. We were really keen to focus on feedback. So we got a lot of information, and I'll work through how we did that. But we were very clear with our community. We would go back to them and talk to them about the things that we could do, and the things also that the funding wouldn't allow us to do, and where we would take that feedback and information. And that is vital in terms of taking the community with you. One of the key things Burnley Council, who are our accountable body, were very, very keen on is they wanted this to be a sustainable funding programme, and given the speed of consultation and the likely outcome of that, in order for communities to feel part of it, they needed to feel a sense of ownership. If I could have the next slide, please, Jason. So in terms of the work that we did, we were very, very lucky that the economic development team at Burnley Council got us off to a quick start. So before we'd even formed our initial view, they worked with me and several other kind of key local people that would lead the process to engage PS consultants. By the time we got to our first board meeting, we were able to furnish that meeting with 1,800 responses to a local community survey. That had been done through very traditional methods, but we'd also started to roll out opportunities around pop-up events. So we were taking the research and the consultation out into the communities and doing very kind of targeted work, really. We have got quite a diverse community in Burnley, and we know particularly our Bangladeshi and Pakistani community will require additional things in order to engage effectively. So we were really conscious and keen to make sure we were able to reach out into those communities and do things well. We adopted something called Hair, Care and Prayer, and quite often I think you see with consultation there's an expectation for people to come to it. We very much took a view that we needed to take the consultation to the places where people were and make it accessible to them. So we took it into hair salons, mosques, churches, the local kind of religious institutions, doctors' surgeries, places like that, and we made it accessible. We put QR codes on things. We gave people access to tablets so that they could do that. And we also provided paper copies and worked through that with people, which resulted obviously in the high level of outcome. What that meant for us in terms of the outcome at our first board meeting, we were able to provide some really specific data around what we thought people needed and wanted, and that came from the point of view of the community. We were also able to break that down in terms of what different parts of our community wanted, where that was kind of representative of different areas of the town and different demographics, and that became increasingly important as we moved through the early part of the research programme. If I could have the next slide, please, Jason. The key part of our success in terms of consultation was having an effective town board. We didn't have a town board prior to the announcement, but what we did have was we had some existing relationships that were deep rooted. Those existing relationships that were already there included our anchor institutions, so the key organisations that were investing in the town. Our businesses, we're very, very fortunate in Burnley to have an organisation or an umbrella partnership called Burnley Bondholders, where over 100 of our most significant businesses get together 2 to 3 times a month to talk about the town and what matters to them and to us kind of civically and corporately. So we had an effective network there. We've also got incredible networks around our third sector and community partners. So the board was very quickly able to bring all of that together into one space, and we were able to identify from each of those networks the key people that were able to get things done. What that meant for us was we had a lot of high-profile individuals. So we had Alan Pace, who's the chairman of our Premier League football club. We had the leader of the council, the MP, and lots of other people at that level that could help with the strategic thinking, the strategic conversation. Also, from my own perspective, really helpful in terms of getting the message out, because they would use their communication channels to get to people. But we also had lots of doers like me, people that could listen to those conversations and interpret that work, take it back into the community subgroups, and make it meaningful, and then translate that conversation back to the board around what does this mean in practice. So that gave us a really good kind of two-way flow of information. It made things quick, it made things simple, and it made operationally, I wouldn't say simple, but it made it clear for us to be able to move things forward. What that gave us in terms of early work around the first board meeting, we were able to very quickly establish the 4 subgroups that were set up, and each of those subgroups we were able to direct the work of those subgroups with a view to what our communities wanted and needed. So we were very specific around focus on these objectives, forget about them because that doesn't matter to our community, and that led to us being able to very quickly by the kind of deadline dates get the proposals together for the government. If I could have the next slide, please. So this is my final slide, and I'm just going to talk in summary about the group that I led on, the community engagement group. And our key focus was around the pace of work, which was important, but also accountability back to our local community. We were really clear about our objective as a group was about doing the right thing for the right people. And it was really clear to us that there were some parts of our community that needed investing in more than others. And that comes across your kind of usual socio-economic characteristics, your geographical characteristics. But the feedback from the consultation work that we did suggested key groups, particularly around young people, that required this investment making in them. In terms of the group dynamic, we were very, very focused on making sure we had knowledgeable people, but also people that had a stake in the town. We wanted people for who Burnley mattered to be involved in that group and to be wanting to contribute to that group. We had lots of community leaders in there. We had lots of community leaders that put themselves forward, but we wanted to choose people that actually represented parts of the community and would be able to access as places and open doors that previously we may not have been able to do. And also importantly on that, the community leaders were absolutely phenomenal at oining people and cajoling people into filling in the questionnaires. And it was quite often them going to their groups and saying, if you don't do this, you will get the same outcome that you always get rather than the outcome that you want to see. So really, really important people. We got access through the informal channels. So a couple of really good examples on that. We have a Eastern European WhatsApp group we found out through this process, which has over 2,000 members of our Eastern European community in it. We were able to access that group through community leaders and send information out, helping to boost our numbers from a really important part of our community and often underrepresented. And similar to Wigan, we have a youth board, and we were really clear that we wanted their view in what we were doing, but we also asked them to go out and get the views of their friends and peers through their networks and feed that in. The kind of final point on key people is it was the involvement of the local press, and we were very kind of clear with John, who represented them, that we talked about positive vibes only. We didn't want negative comments coming out around government money wasted and that type of discussion. We were fortunate that John would never do that anyway, but it was really important in terms of some of the responses we got back to the thinking we were doing, that we were able to, on a weekly basis, have column inches in our local paper and on their social media channels that actually brought about positive engagement. And what the Burnley Express, who are our local paper, did for us was even the negative stuff, they interpreted that for us and brought that commentary back into the room. So that gave us a really interesting and I think quite unique insight into a level of engagement that we don't often see, which is understanding some of the negative feedback as well as the stuff that people are saying through questionnaires. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy for people to ask me questions. I hope it's been useful. On back to you, Matt.
Thank you for that. You know what? Absolutely inspirational. Honestly, it's so exciting when you see communities actually engaging in a really constructive manner. and people who care about a community and a place developing it. So thank you for sharing that. We'll come next to Danny, Jason. But Philip, just last question from me before I'll come back to the question at the end. If you were starting this from scratch tomorrow, what would you do differently than what you've done previously?
I think it's the formality of it. I think I changed that. We need to think differently about how we gather information from communities. And for us, it works really well to have questionnaires that give us numbers, data that we can quantify, we can measure, we can put in graphs. But actually, communities just want to talk. And I think finding a way to quantify an open conversation, that's where the richness of data is. When people just sit and talk about, finding a way to quantify that would give us miles better outcomes in terms of what we're trying to achieve. And that would be my focus, I think.
And I love as well, I love the fact you talk about that WhatsApp group, because it's giving a voice to the people that sometimes don't have a voice, and they're just as important as part of the community as well. So thank you for that. Danny, over to yourself.
Thank you, Matt. I think I'm sharing my own slides, so I'm just going to do the clicks, and hopefully that'll all work. Matt, could you just tell me that you can see that?
I can see that, yep.
Magic. Okay, super. So today I was going to talk a little bit about a really important part of the fund and the funding application, which is building the evidence base around your local needs. And so I'll be talking about mapping context and uncovering challenges and opportunities in a place, and really understanding the kind of nature of a place from its identity and its character and its needs. I guess first of all, we think about what is place. So for us, we think about the physical setting, we think about the activities that happen in a place, and we also think about the meaning, and that the meaning part is the kind of slightly less tangible part. So the meaning's perhaps about perceptions and about memories and about cultural associations. Physical settings, a bit easier to understand. That's about permeability, it's about microclimate and landmarks. And then activity can be picking up themes around like vitality, what the street life is like, where do people play. And then from an outcome perspective, from a place outcomes perspective, we can look at different kind of targets. So it might be that your outcomes are around creating people first places, or it might be that actually you really want to build on your heritage and culture. But it's important to understand those opportunities at the outset. And then in terms of what can we do from the place perspective, well, we've talked a bit about this, and Melanie mentioned it already. So the regen plan, town plans really allow for both physical interventions and also community initiatives. And that's partly mapping or following on from that split of the fund on a 75-25 capital revenue basis. Everybody would be familiar with the themes. Obviously this increased, so long-term plan for towns had 3 themes. We've now got 8 themes, so a much broader area of choice about what you might do and how you might make change in your place. What we've been looking at is indicators that help us to start to build up a picture of place around these key themes. We've then taken geospatial information and maps and used that to spatially paint a picture of what is happening in different towns associated with this fund. So for example, here's the health and well-being mapping themes and some of the indicators that we've been looking at to help us understand and to help start conversations with boards and the public about their place. So we might look at health in terms of how easy it is to access health assets. You can see in that first map there where the red part of Newton the Willows is really difficult to access particular health assets there. So that could be a target area. On the plus side, we'll be looking at sports infrastructure. So how quickly can residents of a town or a place access places for exercise and healthy activities. We look at regeneration, high streets and heritage, and we might think about green spaces, which are supporting that kind of regeneration of places from a residential perspective. We look at what the retail component is, where it sits within the plan boundary, how it interacts with with other retail components in neighbouring spaces and places. And that also look at kind of socioeconomic deprivation. So how can we target regeneration in places that really need it? And then we looked here at cohesion, for example. So we've used data to map social infrastructure. So where are the health centres? Where are the community centres? Where are the play areas? Where are those third place locations where communities can come together and really thrive? We also may look at the arts and cultural offer. So where is that, and what is it providing, and where are the deficits? So data's great. You know, we love data. We love kind of digging through information to paint a picture of place, but it's very one-dimensional in a way. So we take that data and we build a set of observations. We're very much kind of map-driven observations. But the important part of the process is really to take that through to local consultation, local engagement, co-production, to use as provocations and tests and challenges to gain those local insights. That's really where we then start to create a vision. And that vision is very much not an us vision, certainly not a consultant support team vision. It's much more of a we vision, and it's consultant teams supporting and facilitating Towns Board in gathering information from stakeholders and communities and building up what is important to that place. Here in Lee, in Wigan, we were able, from those findings and that feedback, to start to establish a set of objectives around the key themes at the time, those 3 key themes. And from those, a set of outcomes for the place. Lee is safe, Lee is attractive, Lee is connected, Lee is supportive and prosperous. And from that, then a vision came forward, which we were able to form the core, the heart, really, of everything that we were planning in terms of the initiatives. So the last couple of slides then are around some of the challenges in this process. From a mapping perspective and context understanding. Certainly if you're in GIS, the geospatial mapping, you're not really getting that lived experience information. So it's really important to build in that participatory mapping. Old school, analog, big pages, big sheets on a wall, and post-it notes, and co-design workshops to work with boards and stakeholders and young residents and visitors to really capture how people experience and value the places and spaces. And we've also used different digital tools, but in a slightly different way, where we've opened up polls, questionnaires, and geo-referencing maps to gather information in through a digital platform that captures everything, gives everybody a voice, but actually is not as closed off as the pure geospatial mapping. We've found, again, with the digital mapping, that there's this kind of invisibility of that informal or some of those emotional spaces. So, you know, where do the kids like to play? Where do the older people like to sit in the sun? Where do people feel most welcome? Or maybe even where people feel unsafe. So again, different techniques for that. So top right, we've used a workshop, or safaris as we called them, here to walk the streets of the place and gather information from people as we're kind of experiencing it ourselves. Bottom right, we did some work with young residents as school kids in Rosendale to mind map their journeys around the town. What do they perceive as being important parts of that experience? And then finally, I think there's a tension between that kind of quite cold technical output from the mapping and the more emotional narrative that we get from talking to people who live in places. So it's really important to bring those two together. The way that we present things is a bit of a mixture. Sometimes it is that digital mapping, which is quite useful. Often in summary, we try to bring quite rich story-based visuals into our output. So here you can see a map of Haywood, which is starting in a kind of quite sketchy form to identify where some of the key interventions might be. And importantly, really important to to be clear on why the information that you've gathered is important. So great, you've mapped all these different things, but what are the important outcomes of that? Why is that mapping useful? So just to close, I think just to reinforce that point, really, data's fantastic and it's given us great insight into places, but really it's those lived experiences that are key. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to create places where people and nature can thrive, and so it's all about those human interactions, really. Okay, thanks, Matt. I'll close my slides. Happy to take any questions now.
Yeah, while we're waiting for Johnny's slides to be loaded by Jason, I just think I'd be really keen to understand. We'll do the questions at the end, but you talk there about engaging. I love the fact you're talking about the why. Really giving people what they need to connect with the vision. What's been the thing that you found that people connect with most in terms of when you're presenting data? What's got people to latch onto it and really engage with it meaningfully?
I mean, I think different groups engage in different ways. So when we talked to the young residents in Rawtenstall, they were really focused on the kind of activities of the place. So, what could they do in their spare time? They were interested in where the swimming pool opportunities were, where they could go and play, where they could go fish. They all wanted a Primark rather. That's peak town centre for 12 or 14-year-olds. Older residents tended to be much more interested in like getting about the town. How could they access services? Where did they feel unsafe? Where were the problems with crossings? Then you've got other residents who are business owners, and they're interested in antisocial behaviour. They're interested in pollution. They're interested in what the council can do to bring people into the town through programming and curation of the town. So it's really horses for courses, Matt, I think, and it's why it's important to cover a broad range of topics, through your context analysis, really try to cover all the bases of the place.
Thank you very much for that. And talking about community engagement, we'll hand over now to Johnny.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So for me, don't worry, you've seen the two good profiles of the work the guys have done. I just want to try and bring it together in some kind of hot takes, some key considerations from the work we've done in Lee, Burnley, Darwen, with Danny, stuff that I think the people in the room can take away as considerations as they're kind of undertaking the plan for neighbourhoods. Next slide, Jace. So the first one is obviously use a community-led iterative process. Okay, obviously that underpins the programme itself, but I think the aspect here is to really get the right people, doing the right work in the right room. Okay, and when you initially start kind of looking at how you're forming your board and who you're consulting with and who the stakeholders are, sometimes there's the instinct to maybe look at the kind of who you perceive to be the most influential. But actually, as it starts to tease out, really kind of start to look at who's loosely connecting. They're still friends, they're still advocates of the programme and the work that you're doing, but understanding that profile of the people you've got involved in the process is key. Who are the co-creators? Who are the people who are actually going to get down there and help shape the programme, how it's going to look over an extended period of time? So you're looking really at who's actively participating in the work. And sometimes the biggest name on the person wearing the most hats isn't actually the right person, the right organisation to be doing the co-creative process. There's someone else. And then finally, who are the stewards? Who are the custodians? Who are the ones that are deeply committed? And the ones that are going to see the programme through from that stage in terms of out of development into delivery, are really going to get under the skin of understanding it. And I think really looking at who the profile of the right people in the right places are as you undertake the development of the plan and what goes forward is really, really key. And that changes. There are commitments, that there are the things that other people face, but thinking about that and constantly reviewing that as you're going along is really, really important. And then obviously thinking about how you're communicating with them and looking at how they're communicating with each other. I'm always a kind of seek first to understand and then to be understood. And I think, Lee and Wigan's a good example, whereas there was a significant shift instead of the talking coming from, you know, the contractor, the consultant in the room, and actually the bit of facilitating the conversations of other people, was particularly in that kind of intense time period, was really key to flick that very quickly and put the people in that room on the platform. It's their plan, it's not our plan. We're there to shape it, and we're there to support, you know, the local authority as the accountable body, help shape that as well. So managing that is key. So that's the first one. Next one, Jace. It's a big one for me. This is, don't be scared of difficult conversations. Okay, I think everybody particularly from local authority background here, but also kind of those that kind of step forward from private sector or third sector organisation into actually kind of making a difference and making a change. You know, you have to understand that there's a lot of people with either an agenda, and it could be a justifiable and appropriate agenda. They could be resistant to change. They've got things they want to talk about. And I think building, you know, a phrase I love is that you know, you can only move at the speed of trust, you know, and trust comes from listening, from understanding, and actually giving people a platform to have some of those kind of challenges and rubs, and reading, you know, and asking whether people accept what's been said. Once that starts and starts on a broad level, it can be incredibly powerful, but it also creates a better relationship and dynamic, so expectations can be managed. Okay, so somebody challenging or coming with an agenda or coming in with an issue means they care, and that's a really good place to be starting with. And if people are resistant to the change, and people will be resistant to change, it's important to understand why, you know, and that's about taking time to listen and involving them, and helping and communicate that. And it often leads to a higher level of both impact and engagement, which is basically what this process needs to be based on. Okay, next one, Jace. Use interesting methods of engagement. This is a big one, and what works in one place doesn't necessarily work in another. But I find that element of working with you know, the boards and the councils and the people finding out actually what's going to work for them and listening to what they say. And again, I think Phil said it is actually kind of taking engagement activities to them and thinking about the format and the way in which it's communicated is really key. The best discussions often, I think Danny said it as well, don't always happen in the boardroom. So exploring different and interesting ways, one, keeps it vibrant and interesting. Two, means that you get real, richer bits of kind of intelligence, really, and quality bits of data and information that can inform the program in a different way. You know, we do a lot of gamification. We actively look to go out there and do different groups. And I think the safaris that Danny mentioned were what we thought was selected for Lee, and I really think that made a massive difference to the cohesion of the board, and it hit that spot that we're always looking for when we're working in multiple places. People actually start to think of themselves as a team. They start to see the direction of travel, and that was because we got them out of that boardroom. We got them looking at their place. We got them talking together, and we built really some authentic relationships. You know, and I think that's key, considering that the original program halted, and has probably helped, you know, at least hold that together for when it you know, when it's now being adapted and picked back up again. I never thought I'd be doing shadow puppetry for under 12s and the kind of work that I do, but those kind of things can be really rewarding talking to parents. So there's loads of stuff out there and cool things that can be done. Next one, Jace. Develop strong foundations, and that can be agile and can support success whatever happens. You know, this is a long transformational program, and I think that's what makes it so exciting, really, and can be so impactful. But as we were talking before we started, if you just track back on the last 5 to 10 years of all the things that have happened and have changed the landscape, whether it's economic, whether it's social, whether it's environment, they're significant. So you have to understand that's going to happen, but that foundation is absolutely key. So firstly, you know, community and community groups and community activities are relatively really robust. You know, they're going to change, they're going to evolve. If you're looking over 10 years, it's a generational shift. So making sure that relationships there, understanding that network and dark matter, being responsive to that change and talking is key. But communities know what they want. They will tell you. You know, the better and deeper the conversation, the more honest the conversations you're having, you can take that and that will and that will shape the programme, but be conscious that that's going to change over time, and that different demographics, different people in different geographical locations, different pressures coming from different backgrounds, are going to see things through a different way. That doesn't mean they're wrong, but that's where understanding that and building that relationship's key, because that's going to shift. And be prepared that you will have to adapt. It will have to change. You will have to be responsive, and that's okay. But if the depth of that consultation is there, and you're constantly engaging and consulting, and there's a strong program and format that you and a strong vision that you're using as a platform, and you're open to change, that's a positive position to be in. Next one, Jason. And then finally, this is really quite key, which is understanding your impact, telling people what you're trying to achieve alongside it, what you're trying to achieve. So record the shared stories, and then share those shared stories broadly. Talk about place and people's positive relationship with it. Understand what's important about the past. It's not immediately to dismiss. People want to hark back to 10, 20 years ago when they all believe everything was better, or even 30, 40 or 50 years ago. It's really, but acknowledging that truly and honestly, again, is really, really key. And understanding how people are working together now, how they're communicating, the languages that you're using, and where they want to get to. Because sometimes that's an output, but sometimes that's an outcome, and how you get there is down to you. But understanding the distinction between that, and actually what that output or outcome, what the impact of that is going to have on them, on the place itself, and broadly on, as an overall thing. Because sometimes, those changes, the period of getting to the point of development to actually realise them is a little bit longer than a lot of communities and people generally understand. So you need to be able to kind of understand where you're getting to with that. And then looking, when you're measuring and understanding that impact, what tools you can use and deploy. Mentimeter, I think, was mentioned, that can really help and quantify that and be able to communicate it in a way that is understandable to everybody. A lot of us can work at a very technical level with this, but actually I think if you look at some of the maps that Danny put together, you could really get under the skin of it. The Mentimeter was really engaging, and the stuff that PS Research as well did was in the right language and out on a broader base. And really be clear how the community are going to be involved in that change and that impact. Transfer ownership. This is a collective process. This is about doing this together. And understanding, I think, the value of change. Positive impacts in one place can have a negative component in another. So you've got to be able to understand that aspect to it. But I think gather that, collect that, and communicate it back out on a regular basis is really, really important. People need to see that things are happening. They need to see that things are changing. They need to see that this long-term change is going to be really positive. And I think that is it for me. Jace, last slide.
Lovely, Johnny. We've got well, firstly, Chris Marsh, great question. You've had a lot of positive feedback in the chat. So this question is going to be for all the presenters, but we've got this is going to be the only question we'll do. If you have any other questions, guys, please do email Jason and we'll get a written answer to that question sent back to you. So we're interested to see the presenters, see the relationship between the plan for neighbourhoods and what the Neighbourhoods Green Paper is saying about mission critical neighbourhoods, areas that areas that most need focus to re-engage economically and socially. Will your work initially planned, I presume, at town level need to pivot to specifically focus on the most disadvantaged small areas? This seems a key consequence of the shift that is happening in policy terms from the plan for towns. Big question. Danny, go to you first.
Thanks a lot. So I think the long-term plan for towns and the plan for neighbourhoods, even when it was long-term plan for towns, although there was a focus on the high street and town centres, it wasn't the only focus. So we were already looking around that boundary, which was quite a bit broader than the town centre itself. So I think that certainly in plan for neighbourhoods, the consideration is that the area of interest, the area of study is much broader than just the town centre. And so, yeah, understanding where those needs are, whether they're in local residential areas, whether they're in open green spaces, whether they're in kind of more commercial areas, or whether they're in the traditional kind of high street retail areas, that they're all up for grabs in Plan for Neighbourhoods. And with that increase in themes from 3 to 8, the type of interventions that you can bring forward are much broader as well. So it gives places much more scope, I think, to identify where their particular need is and then target change in that place.
Thank you, Danny. Johnny, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. You know, it's weird. We're doing 2 pieces of work here at the moment. We're doing one up in Carlisle and one for Birmingham. And one is about social impact modelling, and the other one is about really kind of getting under the skin and engaging with a community neighbourhood, really to look at how you can unlock capacity. So, in essence, how it looks like for me is that it's the last point that I made, which is understanding impact. Strategically, you've got to look at where you're going to have the greatest impact, and that revenue capital split is a bit of a challenge, because I'm a great believer is if you can unlock the community capacity in neighbourhoods potential on a broader basis, you can really improve the quality of life and long-term economic impact of a place overall. So I think making those questions about how the resource you've got is deployed on a broader platform, is it better to kind of centralize it into the activities within the town centre, because that's going to have broader benefit of the communities on the wider level, or actually should be looking back and looking actually if that resource is allocated into the smaller kind of neighbourhoods and communities in different places, is it going to lock a critical mass of activity? So I think it's a strategic question firstly, but what I think the instinct is always to look at the centre, because we see it as the barometer of place. We see it as the barometer of how healthy a place is going to be. But I think as this is community based, understanding the social impact and then that transfer to economic impact of how small amounts of revenue based investment can go to the right places to unlock a significant amount of capital is key at this point. And I think that there's a bit of breathing space to having those conversations, and not just going to actually, if we do this, we're going to get the minimum amount of pushback and everybody's going to benefit from that, and instead actually getting under the skin and really finding out what people want. The work in Carlisle at the Raffles estate, for example, you look at it and think, well, for a small amount of investment here, we can do fantastic amount of work for a significant proportion of the population who have basically kind of not been marginalised, but they've been having a very difficult economic time, and in that kind of in a poverty bracket. You think actually this could be incredible, whereas that money wouldn't touch the sides in terms of the city, the town city centre. So the question is a really good one, but understanding the potential impact and what that means over a longer period of time is absolutely key. And on the basis of that, then you can make the decisions in terms of investment and deployment and the right type of interventions, as Danny said.
Thank you for that, Johnny. Philip, is there anything you'd like to add to what's been said already?
I think only a brief thing, really. I think I agree with all them the points. The kind of key thing for me is not seeing it in isolation as a fund. It's thinking about, and I think one of the things Burnley did really well with the previous fund, and I think they will do well again with this, is to think about this in the context of what else is coming into the town and how do we shape and fit a whole funding pot rather than seeing them as individual funding pots. And there is the long-term plan for towns. It was pretty inflexible, particularly around the capital and revenue stuff. But what we kind of identified is there was other money coming into the town that had greater flexibility. So shifting priority and focus from one to the other probably meant we could achieve more. So it's just thinking about the whole impact and effort, and fundamentally that will drive the outcomes overall, I think.
Thank you, Philip. And finally, Melanie?
I agree with everything that everyone said. And I think just to summarise, one thing to balance up is understanding the difference between equality and equity. And I think a lot of the targeting comes down to that and how that's implemented. But I accept what's in the chat around potential. Potentially that's a difficult message to deliver and can be divisive. So I have to be very clear about the targeting and the impact, as Johnny was saying.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth as well, I think from a local government perspective, I think when you look at the main costs around SEND and social care and all of the costs that are reactive, if you can be proactive with your community and explain to them, if we're doing this, then actually we're going to have more money to then reinvest because our budgets aren't going to be slashed because of that. It's that systems thinking which unlocks the potential. Now, really quickly, guys, let me please keep your attention. We've got Mentimeter coming up now, which is very exciting. Jason, will you put the QR code up for us, please? Now, the whole purpose of this, guys, is we want to create content that really resonates and adds value to you. So if you could kindly either put in the chat or on the Mentimeter, scan and kind of put in there what you want to see in terms of content that will truly add value to you. You know, what would future event topics be? I think the thing for me is, obviously I don't work for Genicon, but what I would say as a consultancy, that it's so refreshing to have a consultancy that truly lives by its values and wants to help achieve tangible outcomes for its customers. So I guess from this, if you have questions, you can email Jason as an initial touch point, who's been organising this for us. So thank you very much, Jason. Jason, if you put your email address in the chat, just so that people can email you with any specific questions. And ask yourself the question, are you on track to deliver what you want to deliver? And if you're not, you know, do think about having a conversation with Jason and Johnny and Danny about how they could support you. But I'd like to thank every member of the panel here today. It's fantastic to see the great work that's been done across the UK. So thank you very much for taking the time to present today.
Thank you, Matt. And I genuinely didn't pay him to say that. So thank you, mate. But thank you, Matt. That was absolutely fantastic, and we really appreciate, you know, you giving your time up here to chair and to, you know, facilitate this for us. It was great.
It's been a real privilege to see and to listen to the guys at the work that you're doing. So, guys, have a great rest of your week, and see you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you all.